on EnviroNews Utah with Bradley Angel of GreenAction. Could you tell us your position there?
I'm the executive director.
Cool. Where are you in from today, by the way?
Well, I go back and forth between Moab, Utah and San Francisco, California.
All right. So if you could tell me, what's motivated you to come out here today? I know you have some past experience with Stericycle. What can you tell us about that history?
Well, I've been concerned about this facility, them burning waste shipped here from many states for probably about 15 years now. And long before actually the neighborhood, Foxboro neighborhood, was even built. We were very concerned about this. And we were concerned because, number one, burning medical waste is a really bad idea. It's unnecessary. There's other alternatives to safely deal with medical waste, which has to be done, of course. And because even if you were the most honest company with the utmost integrity and the best equipment, you would unavoidably still be putting some of the deadliest chemicals known to science into the air, such as dioxin, which is the accidental byproduct of burning stuff with chlorine, which unfortunately medical waste has a lot of, particularly PVC plastics. So we were really concerned about that, but I was also concerned because we knew there was lax regulation here. Nobody was really minding the store of what was happening in this facility. They burn not only medical waste, but contraband also. For example, they were burning weapons, which are metals. You cannot burn metals and destroy them. So that was going into the air also.
Now, speaking of Foxboro and this whole community that's been built up around this facility, we looked at some documents from a meeting, I think all the way back to '99, where, it's stated in there that nothing is supposed to be built up within a square mile of this facility. Are you familiar with those discussions and what happened there? And how did this happen? Who's pointing the finger at who?
Actually, that document goes back way before 1999. It goes when this facility was first built by a company called Browning Ferris Industries. And the city of North Salt Lake said nothing should be within a mile. Nobody should be living within a mile. When Foxboro started being built, myself and some other North Salt Lake residents started going door to door. And we were talking to residents, and they were horrified. A lot of young families, first-time home buyers, and I came across nobody that knew what they moved next to. A couple of people found, tiny print on page whatever of their purchase agreement that there was a facility, but it didn't say what came out of it. If people asked, they were told it was steam. And yes, there is steam, but there's also a wide range of hazardous air pollutants and soot and particulates that can make you sick and worse.
So speaking about that particulate, we were in a town hall just last week where we asked Stericycle point blank if they were burning prions here. And their response to that was that they were allowed to accept them and that they would have to notify the state if they were to incinerate them. And in the same meeting, emergency bypasses were discussed. But what's your thought process on that?
Well, of course, with the first issue, it's a tremendous concern, particularly bringing animals infected with that disease into a residential neighborhood with lots of young kids is outrageous, especially a facility that has problems. The bypass issue is one that actually we brought to the public's attention and has challenged the company and the state and the US EPA on this for 15 years now. An example, many years ago, I toured this facility, and myself and some area residents, and we showed up a little early, and there's black smoke pouring out of what's called the bypass stack. There's the regular stack that's bad enough, that has pollution control equipment that doesn't capture everything. There's the bypass stack that's used often, and it's used for when they start up, shut down, and for what's called upset conditions, like a power outage, or it's about to blow. They vent the unfiltered toxic waste that's burned but not screened for pollutants right out. And that never shows up in the emissions data. Not once ever in the history of this facility has been quantified, has been measured, or has been monitored. And so when I showed up on this tour, black smoke was pouring out, and we were to meet the regional manager who was flown in, and the facility manager. We show up and say, why is there black smoke pouring out of the bypass stack? They said, there is no black smoke pouring out of the bypass stack. So I said, well, maybe let's step into your parking lot. And of course, black smoke was pouring out of the bypass stack. They then turned, went into their office, got their car keys, jumped into their cars, and drove away. And that was our tour. And that should tell you a lot. And concern again because about 5 years ago there was big meetings here with residents when Stericycle's permit was up for renewal. And there was a lot of concern, and the state assured the residents that it was safe. They assured the residents that they would put up a web page on the Division of Air Quality website listing actual emissions, and all they did was cut and paste it from Stericycle's website that didn't have accurate information, and they completely omitted all the emissions from the bypass stack, which puts unfiltered toxic waste and particulates that can make people sick and worse into the air.
Now, it's our understanding that there used to be about 2,400 of this type of facility nationwide, and over the course of probably a couple of decades, I mean, we're down to like a couple dozen. This is one of the only ones, if not the only one, left west of the Mississippi that takes this kind of waste. What can you tell us about the history there? How have communities and groups been successful in the past, or what was the actual course to these facilities being shut down in mass across the country?
It's a really good question why this is one of the last standing, and we hope it's not standing for very much longer. And hundreds and hundreds of these medical waste incinerators, both commercial facilities and incinerators at hospitals, were shut down due to community concerns and scientific concern about what comes out of them when you burn the plastics and mercury thermometers and other materials. And no matter how well you run it, you still get terrible pollutants coming out. At the same time, the United States EPA did a study called the Dioxin Reassessment Study, and they found that incinerators, including medical waste incinerators, were the largest contributors to dioxin in our environment. And dioxin is super potent in minute levels of exposure, and you cannot avoid creating it. It's not in the medical waste. But when you burn the PVC plastics, that's really prevalent in medical waste, oops, you get dioxin coming out. It's called a product of incomplete combustion, and it's the most toxic chemical known. And so the EPA tightened up their regulations a bit, not enough. So a lot of incinerators had to shut down, and then the few like this are left standing because there's not rigorous regulation to protect the public. There's not adequate monitoring, as we've discovered here, unfortunately. And even when you violate the law, as this company has apparently done seriously for years now, pretty much nothing happens. So the success has been some facilities shut down voluntarily, but others, for example, Stericycle had a big commercial incinerator operating in Arizona on a poor Indian reservation, the Gila River Indian community. Unfortunately for Stericycle, our organization worked closely with tribal members there on a number of issues, and we educated tribal members and tribal leaders about what was going on. Stericycle operated the incinerator on the Gila River Indian community for decades without proper federal permits.
And was the community there pretty much oblivious to the danger?
They did not know. They had no permits. The U.S. government didn't tell them what was going on, and they didn't know what was happening pretty much until my organization, who had good relations with the tribe, educated them, and they were up in arms, and Stericycle saw the growing protest, and they shut the incinerator down. In California, another company had a giant incinerator, hundreds of violations. The government wouldn't protect the community, and residents took matters into their own hands, had huge protests, and the good thing there that we saw is hospitals that had contracts with the incinerator started pulling it once they learned of the violations. Maybe the same thing will happen here.
Where's that waste going now?
The good news is, there's good news and bad news. The people in California, including our organization, when that incinerator run by a company called IES shut down, Stericycle actually bought the customer list. But they chopped up the incinerators in the parking lot to the cheers of neighbors. The good news is they chopped up the incinerators. The good news is they built a sterilization plant a few miles away and hired some of the workers, which was great. The bad news is they sent some of the waste here. And that's also been, for me and our organization, also we feel an ethical responsibility to not have California's waste dumped here on the Utah neighbors.
What's the next step for this community and for the battle in this particular facility?
The next steps are several. One is tomorrow morning, some of the neighbors and myself from GreenAction, some of the physicians and Heal Utah are meeting with the top state officials. And we're going to ask them, what are you going to do about these violations? Why are you letting them still operate when they are being charged by you, the state agency, with not only violating pollution limits, but apparently submitting, knowingly false information for their state mandated reports. And we're going to be challenging them. We're going to explain why the next permit has to be denied because they can't possibly assure compliance as the law requires. We're going to be pressuring the EPA to grant our appeal that they've been sitting on for 4 years. We're going to challenge the new permit, and we're going to start talking to some of the hospitals. And I think the neighbors and a lot of other folks will be back right where we're standing today sooner rather than later. We'll do what we have to do with the facts and truth on our side and knowing that kids are being poisoned, and we can't let that continue.
Bradley Angel, GreenAction, thanks for speaking with us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.